Object perception. This week's content contains a lot of video. We're finally moving beyond the eyes, the retina, and low-level processing of V1 to actually recognize stuff. The first two videos illustrate the challenge in recognizing stuff. The first of which is information overload. There's a ton of information coming in from your eyes, way more than you could ever process. Dan Simon's video, where he talks about inattentional blindness, explains how we select a portion of the visual field to recognize in detail, and the rest of the visual field is not recognized in detail. We then move on to a different challenge with Josh Redman's video from his TED Talk. This different challenge is that objects are constantly changing. Their size changes, the perspective changes, shading changes, objects move. Right? They get closer, farther, people and animals bend and twist. How do we still recognize the objects? This notion of view invariance. This problem, looking at solutions side computer science, helps us appreciate how the brain might solve these problems. Those videos then lead us into this notion of two kinds of information in object perception. The bottom-up information that comes from the sensory world and the top-down information that comes from memory, that both play a role. And what you see is this interaction between the physical features of the environment and your long-term knowledge. Right? And we can see pure bottom-up information when you're recognizing something completely new. And we can see pure top-down information in dreams and hallucinations when only the internal model, only the top-down information is present. As a theory of object perception, right, as we're moving into what's happening in area V5 and in fusiform and in other higher brain areas, we'll look at Biedermann's recognition by components theory. The idea that what you're perceiving is a combination of abstract shapes, like Legos. Right? Perceptually, your brain builds everything you see out of these 36 basic geometric forms. Right? What are the cells detecting? They're detecting an arrangement of geometric forms. So we'll look at evidence from there. Right, so, and again, what happens where is interesting. Right, last week's chapter covered V1 and V2, like the occipital low-level vision areas you see here. This week's chapter gets into V5, and it gets into V4, V5, and things that happen in fusiform on the temporal floor. The next place we'll go is into agnosia. We'll look at prosopagnosia and visual object agnosia. We'll look at what happens when a stroke damages these areas of the brain and try and understand processing in V4, V5, MT, and fusiform by looking at strokes that damage these areas and what happens when you lose these abilities. Finally, a look at Gestalt theories this week also that functionally describe what's happening with laws of figure grouping. The Gestalt laws are illustrated quite nicely in the interactive demonstrations. So this week's object perception go into each of the Gestalt laws of figure discrimination. So a good mix this week. There are videos of neuropsychology patients who lose an ability. There are videos of computer scientists who are simulating object perception. And there are videos of neuropsych experiments and neuropsych patients. So that is our content on object perception this week.